Steam billowed through the tiled room like smoke over a battlefield, clouding the harsh fluorescent light until everything looked dreamlike, unreal. Laughter echoed from the far corner, sharp and mocking, cutting through the hiss of hot water. She stood alone under a showerhead, water cascading down her back, and tried to ignore them. The sting of their words bit harder than the scalding spray. "Look at her," one of them jeered, a tall corporal with a towel slung across his shoulder like a sash. "Standing there like she owns the place. Bet she's never even fired her weapon outside a range." "She probably got here because of a quota," another chimed in, his voice dripping with contempt. "Some diversity checkbox for the brass. They didn't know. Couldn't know." She said nothing, eyes fixed on the tiles at her feet, jaw locked so hard it ached. She could smell the acrid tang of soap and damp metal, hear the hollow clang of lockers opening and closing beyond the steam. She let their laughter roll over her like waves against stone, impassive, unmoving. Her silence only fueled their sneers. "Hey, Commander Barbie," the first man called, voice rising above the hiss. "You gonna cry in the showers again, or?" A sudden blast of sound cut him off, 3 sharp beeps from the overhead intercom, the kind that froze blood. The laughter stopped instantly. The steam seemed to hold its breath. "All personnel report to the briefing room. Code Black. Immediate deployment." Her heart thudded once hard. Around her, towels were dropped, uniforms yanked from benches, boots slammed to the floor. The mocking men scrambled like startled deer, voices frantic now, fear replacing swagger. She turned the water off in one smooth motion, grabbed her towel and wrapped it with clinical precision. No one noticed her anymore. Minutes later they were crammed into the briefing room, damp and half-dressed, while the air hummed with tension. The projector flickered on, throwing cold blue light across their faces. An officer from the Defense Intelligence Agency stood at the front, grim as a funeral. "We have a situation," he said, voice clipped. 40 miles north of Kandahar, a forward observation post has gone dark. Satellite images show heavy movement, likely an insurgent battalion armed with captured Western hardware. If they breach the perimeter, they'll overrun our supply lines. A murmur rippled through the room. She remained still as stone. "We're sending in Fire Team Anvil," the officer continued. "You'll infill by helo, secure the outpost, and hold it until reinforcements arrive. Rules of engagement are weapons-free." Someone cursed under his breath. Someone else muttered about suicide missions. "And your team leader," the officer said, glancing down at his clipboard, "will be Commander Ren Hale." The room froze. Heads turned. Jaws slackened. She stepped forward from the back wall, the towel long since replaced by combat fatigues, hair pulled back in a severe knot. She stood straight as a rifle, expression unreadable. "Understood," she said. No one spoke. Not one of the men who had mocked her in the showers uttered a sound. Their eyes flicked to her and away like she was a blade unsheathed. She met none of their gazes. Instead, she studied the map projected on the wall, absorbing every contour, every approach, every possible kill zone. Her mind was already there, among the dust and stone and blood waiting for them. They lifted off in the dead of night, the rotors of the UH-60 Black Hawk thundering above the runway like distant artillery. The desert below was a black void broken only by the silver thread of a dry riverbed. Inside the helo, men checked their rifles with trembling hands, tried to mask their fear behind forced grins and crude jokes. She said nothing. Just sat with her eyes closed, lips moving silently, not in prayer but in calculation. Wind direction. Possible ambush points. Estimated time to contact. At 0322 hours they hit dirt. The air was knife cold. Dust rose around their boots like smoke. The outpost loomed ahead, a squat silhouette of HESCO barriers and watchtowers, eerily silent. No lights. No movement. No life. "Where's the welcoming committee?" muttered Corporal Finch, the same man who'd called her Commander Barbie. "Quiet," she ordered. Her voice carried the weight of steel. He fell silent instantly. They moved in staggered formation, boots whispering against gravel. Her eyes swept every shadow, every gap in the barriers, every flicker of starlight on metal. Her gut twisted with the kind of dread that came only from experience. Something was wrong. Too wrong. She raised a fist. The team froze. She dropped to one knee, scanning the ground. A glint caught her eye, a thin filament stretched across the entrance, almost invisible. Tripwire. She motioned them back with a single sharp gesture. They obeyed without question now. She drew her knife, slid it under the wire and cut it clean. A second later, a buried charge popped harmlessly as its circuit broke. Booby traps. The whole perimeter was likely laced. They moved slower now, hearts hammering, breaths shallow. At the first watchtower, they found the sentry slumped against the railing, eyes open and glassy. A single bullet hole between them. Silent kills. Efficient. Professional. Inside the barracks, more bodies. Some still in their bunks, throats slit. Others at their posts, rifles fallen from cold hands. She walked among them like a ghost, face impassive though her stomach churned. This had been an execution, not an attack. They reached the command hut. The door hung open. The interior was gutted, computers smashed, hard drives ripped out, maps torn from walls. They knew exactly what to hit, muttered Sergeant Cole, voice hushed like in a cathedral. They knew because someone told them, she said flatly. A traitor. Somewhere high enough to know this post's layout, defenses, rotation schedules. Someone inside the system. Before the weight of that could settle, her earpiece crackled. The lookout on the eastern wall whispered, movement. Lots of it. Coming fast. She bolted for the wall, heart pounding. Through her night vision goggles she saw them. A swarm of figures cresting the dunes, black shapes spilling like ants, rifles glinting. Trucks growled behind them, headlights off, engines snarling in the cold air. An entire battalion. Positions, she barked. Her voice sliced through the rising panic like a whip. Set claymores along the south ridge. 2 teams on the wall, 1 on the mortar. Move. No hesitation now. No mockery. They flew to obey. She climbed the wall, rifle slung across her chest, eyes locked on the approaching tide. She could hear the men muttering prayers, clicking safeties, racking bolts. Could smell cordite and sweat. Could feel the air vibrating with coming death. The first wave hit like a storm. Bullets stitched the walls, snapping against sandbags, sparking off metal. The night erupted in strobing muzzle flashes, deafening cracks, shouts and screams. She returned fire with icy precision, each shot deliberate, controlled. She saw bodies tumble, shadows crumple and kept firing. Left flanks folding. Someone screamed. Hold it, she snapped. Cole, take your team, push them back now. Cole hesitated half a second too long. She leapt down, sprinted through the chaos and slammed a fresh mag home. She dove into the left trench, landing beside a bleeding private, and unleashed a blistering burst that cut down 3 advancing figures. On your feet, she snarled at Cole. Move. He moved. For an hour they fought like cornered wolves. The enemy came in waves, relentless, endless. Ammunition dwindled. Blood slicked the sand. The air reeked of cordite and iron. Men screamed, men died. And through it all she moved like a phantom, everywhere at once, directing fire, dragging the wounded to cover, marking targets for the mortar. At one point a grenade landed at her feet. Without thinking she snatched it up and hurled it back, the explosion shredding 3 attackers mid-charge. The shockwave rattled her teeth, she didn't flinch. They held. Barely. At 0447 hours the last wave broke. The survivors melted into the dunes, vanishing as suddenly as they'd appeared. Silence fell like a shroud. Smoke curled from shattered walls. The outpost was a ruin. Bodies lay everywhere, friends and enemies alike. The survivors slumped in the dirt, too exhausted to speak. She stood among them, chest heaving, rifle dangling from her hand. Blood streaked her cheek. Her eyes were cold as the moon. Finch staggered toward her, face gray, one arm dangling from a bloody sleeve. He stopped a foot away, swallowed hard and said hoarsely, "Commander?" "Save it," she said not unkindly. "Help me count who's still breathing." They moved through the carnage together, dragging the living to a makeshift aid station, covering the dead with tarps. She didn't allow herself to look at their faces too long. Not yet. Not until they were safe. When the last body was accounted for, she collapsed against a crumbling wall and let herself breathe. Just once. Just enough to feel the pain screaming through her muscles. A radio crackled. Cole's voice, ragged, "Command says reinforcements are 4 hours out. We have to hold until then." She closed her eyes. 4 more hours. With half their number gone, ammo nearly dry and enemies likely regrouping already. "We'll hold," she said quietly. "How?" Finch asked. There was no mockery in his voice now, only raw desperation. She opened her eyes. There was a strange light in them, something fierce and unbreakable. "Because if we don't," she said, "none of this meant anything." Then she rose, wiped the blood from her face with the back of her hand, and started walking the perimeter again. Calculating. Planning. Preparing. The men watched her go in silence. Not with contempt now. With something closer to awe. In the showers hours ago they had mocked her as if she were weak. Now they followed her like she was the only thing keeping them alive. And in a way she was. The desert wind had shifted by dawn, carrying with it the smell of charred flesh and burnt sand. The outpost was a shattered skeleton, jagged walls casting long shadows across the blood-soaked ground. Commander Wren Hale stood on the southern perimeter, her silhouette outlined against the pale horizon, eyes sweeping the dunes like a hawk scanning for prey. She hadn't slept. None of them had. Behind her, the survivors moved in a sluggish rhythm, their exhaustion bone-deep. Sergeant Cole hauled sandbags into position along the breached eastern wall, his hands shaking so violently he kept dropping them. Corporal Finch limped from crater to crater, collecting loose ammunition, every step leaving a dark crescent of blood on the dust. No one spoke unless necessary. Words were too heavy right now. Hale's radio crackled. "Command to Anvil, do you read?" She raised it to her mouth. "Anvil Actual. Go ahead. Be advised, reinforcements are delayed. Convoy hit an IED 2 clicks from forward base. Expect at least a 6-hour delay." Her jaw clenched. Understood. 6 hours. They could be dead 6 times over in that span. She didn't let the hesitation bleed into her voice. "Request priority drone surveillance over our AO. And a supply drop if they can risk it." "Copy. Working on it. Hold tight. Hold tight." As if they were clinging to a ledge over a pit. She clipped the radio back to her vest and turned. The men watched her with hollow eyes, waiting. Always waiting, for orders, for hope, for her. "We fortify," she said. "No one rests until these walls hold." No one argued. They worked like the damned. Hale joined them, shoulders burning as she dragged shattered HESCO blocks into place, muscles screaming under the weight. Sweat stung her eyes. Dust caked her throat. Her fingers bled from hauling razor wire bare-handed when her gloves tore. She didn't stop. She stopped, they would too. By midday the outpost was a patchwork of desperation. Walls rebuilt from debris, firing positions carved from rubble, tripwires laced through every gap. The dead were buried in a shallow trench out back, marked by a line of empty helmets. The living didn't look at it. Hale finally called them together in the ruined command hut, its roof half gone, sunlight streaming through the holes like fractured glass. She set a cracked tablet on the table. Its screen flickered with grainy drone footage of the surrounding dunes, empty for now. "They'll be back," she said. Her voice was low, steady. "And next time they'll come heavier." Finch swallowed. "We barely made it through the first wave. We made it because they underestimated us," she replied. "They won't make that mistake twice." Cole rubbed his temples, his face gaunt. "Then what the hell do we do? We've got maybe 6 mags per man, 2 working mortars and no air support." Hale's gaze pinned him. "We make them bleed for every inch. We turn this outpost into a trap they'll regret walking into." For the first time someone almost smiled. It was small, bitter, but it was something. "Cole," she continued, "you and your team will rig the south approach with what's left of our claymores. Finch, take the west wall, improvise more tripwires from comms wire and C4. The rest of you rotate watches. No one alone. No one asleep on post." "And you?" Finch asked quietly. She met his eyes. "I'll find out how they knew." That silenced them. The implication hung heavy in the hot air. Someone had told the enemy exactly how to hit this place. Someone had betrayed them. She found the comms room gutted, wires dangling like entrails, screens smashed. But tucked behind a collapsed server rack, she found a still intact data core, its casing cracked but not destroyed. She crouched in the rubble, fingers flying over her ruggedized laptop, bypassing security protocols with the ease of someone who'd done this in darker places than this one. Logs flickered onto the screen. Transmissions, timestamps, encryption stamps. One stood out. A burst transmission sent 12 hours before the attack, piggybacked on their own satellite uplink, masked as a routine weather report. She decrypted it. Coordinates. Troop counts. Patrol schedules. Cold settled in her gut. Whoever sent it had clearance. High clearance. Higher than anyone here. This betrayal hadn't come from the ground, it had come from somewhere inside the system that had sent them. She copied the file to a drive, slid it into a hidden pocket and powered down the laptop. When she stood, she felt the eyes on her. Finch was leaning in the doorway, bandaged arm in a sling, watching her with something between suspicion and curiosity. "You find something?" "Just trying to get comms running again," she said smoothly. Not a lie but not the truth either. Not yet. Not until she knew how deep this went. He studied her for a moment, then nodded and limped away. She exhaled slowly. She trusted these men now to watch her back in a firefight. But she wasn't sure she could trust them with this. By late afternoon, the sun was a white furnace overhead. The desert shimmered like molten glass. The survivors crouched in the scant shade of their patched walls, drinking warm water from dented canteens, weapons across their laps. Conversation drifted in low murmurs, dry as the sand. Cole sat beside Hale on the crumbled steps of the barracks. He passed her a ration bar without looking at her. "You ever think," he muttered, "that maybe we won't make it out of this one?" She peeled the wrapper with steady fingers. "Every time." He snorted softly. "Doesn't seem to slow you down." "It can't." She took a bite that tasted like sawdust. "Fear's just another variable. You account for it, work around it, move on?" Cole was quiet for a moment. Then, "Back in the showers, we gave you a lot of crap." She didn't look at him. "Yes. Guess we didn't know who we were talking to." She let the faintest ghost of a smile touch her lips. "You still don't." He chuckled once, hollow but real. "Fair." A sharp crack split the air. Everyone froze. Hale was on her feet before the echo faded, rifle up, scanning. A puff of dust rose from the far ridge, half a mile out. A sniper shot, testing range. Then the horizon rippled. Dust plumes. Engines. Movement. Positions. Hale barked. "This is it. Eyes up." They scrambled to their posts, exhaustion burning away under the jolt of adrenaline. Hale sprinted for the command hut, snatched the binoculars and dropped prone on the roof. Through the shimmering heat, she saw them. Technicals with mounted machine guns, troop trucks packed with fighters, banners whipping in the hot wind. And at their center, a hulking armored vehicle. A BMP-1 Soviet-era, stolen from some rusting depot and brought back to life. Its cannon gleamed in the sun like an executioner's blade. Her blood went cold. They had no weapons that could pierce armor. If that BMP breached the walls, it was over. "Cole," she said into her radio, voice like cut stone. "Get the mortar online. Aim for the BMP. If that thing gets within 50 meters, we're dead." "Copy." Finch tripped the southern mines when they hit the choke point. "Time it perfect or they'll see it coming." "On it." She dropped the binoculars, drew her rifle and sighted on the leading technical. Her breath slowed. Her world narrowed to the scope's crosshairs and the pounding of her heart. "Wait for my mark," she whispered. The convoy drew closer, engines howling, dust boiling behind them. The men gripped their triggers like lifelines. Hale's finger tightened. "Mark." The outpost erupted. Claymores roared, fountains of dirt and fire shredding the front rank. Gunfire cracked like thunder. Mortar shells screamed down, blasting trucks into rolling balls of flame. The BMP lurched sideways, tracks grinding as shrapnel hammered its flank. Still it came. Hale fired until her rifle clicked empty, slammed in a fresh mag, kept firing. Fighters dropped in the sand, bodies jerking under the impacts. Screams tore through the smoke. "BMP closing." Cole yelled. Hale grabbed her radio. "Concentrate fire." All teams hit its tracks. Bullets sparked harmlessly off its armor. The BMP rolled through the wreckage, cannon lowering like the gaze of some ancient beast. Then the mortar fired again. The shell struck just under its front plate. The explosion flipped the vehicle like a child's toy, a roaring fireball consuming it. A shockwave punched the walls. The men cheered, wild and ragged. "Don't celebrate yet," Hale shouted. "They're still coming." She was right. Despite the carnage, dozens of fighters kept advancing, screaming war cries, firing wildly. They crashed against the walls, trying to scale them, throwing grenades, clawing for purchase. It was chaos. Dust, blood, fire. Hale was everywhere, dragging a wounded private to cover, emptying her sidearm into an attacker's chest, snatching a dropped grenade and hurling it back over the wall. At one point she caught Finch staring at her mid-battle, awe naked on his face. She snarled, "Eyes front, soldier," and shoved him toward the breach. They held again. Barely. When the last surviving attacker broke and fled into the dunes, the survivors collapsed where they stood. The sun was bleeding into the horizon, painting the wreckage gold and crimson. Smoke curled from burning vehicles. The air reeked of cordite and death. Hale stood atop the wall, chest heaving, scanning the dunes for any sign of a third wave. There was none. Not yet. Cole staggered up beside her, sweat and blood streaking his face. "How the hell are you still standing?" She didn't answer. Couldn't. She was running on fumes and sheer will. "Reinforcements?" he asked. She checked her watch. 2 more hours if they were lucky. Too long. "Get everyone patched up," she said. We might get hit again before they arrive. He nodded and limped off. She stayed on the wall, alone, watching the sun slip below the dunes. The desert was silent again, but it was a predator's silence, the kind that waits with teeth bared. She knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Her radio buzzed softly. A private voice channel. She frowned, tapped it on. "Commander Hale," said a voice she didn't recognize, smooth and calm. "American. You don't know me, but I know you." Her muscles went rigid. "Identify yourself." "That's not important. What's important is that you stop digging. Forget the transmission you found." Her stomach dropped. Cold sweat prickled her spine. "If you don't," the voice continued, "you won't make it out of that desert alive. And neither will your men." Then the channel went dead. Hale stood frozen, the radio crackling softly in her hand, the wind whispering across the dunes like distant laughter. She knew two things with absolute certainty. Someone inside her own command wanted her dead. And they were very, very close to getting their wish. Night settled like a blade. The wreckage of the battlefield lay scattered under the cold desert moon, twisted shadows stretching long and broken. Smoke still drifted from the burnt-out husk of the BMP-1, curling in ghostly ribbons. The outpost was silent now, too silent. Every creak of metal, every crunch of boot on gravel felt like a gunshot in the stillness. Commander Wren Hale crouched on the southern wall, her rifle balanced across her knees. Her eyes never stopped moving, tracing the dunes for any ripple of movement. The voice from the radio still echoed in her head, threading through her thoughts like poison. "Stop digging, or you won't make it out alive." She had replayed it a dozen times, searching for a trace of identity, an accent, a background hum, anything. Nothing. It had been clinical, calculated. Someone had known about the intercepted transmission. Which meant someone had eyes on her systems, or on her. Bootsteps crunched behind her. She didn't turn. "Perimeter's quiet," Cole said, his voice low. "For now." "Good," she murmured. He stood beside her, hands stuffed in his vest pockets, gaze scanning the same empty horizon. They were both filthy, blood-streaked, running on fumes. Yet there was a strange calm to him now, a steadiness she hadn't seen before. War had burned the hesitation out of him. "Men are patched up as best we can manage," he went on. "We've got maybe half our ammo left. Rations are low. Water's lower. How's Finch? Concussed, cracked ribs, still refuses to sit down. Bastard might be made of wire." She almost smiled. "Tell him if he collapses mid-firefight, I'll leave him for the vultures." Cole chuckled quietly, then sobered. "Reinforcements are close?" "Should be," she said. "If they didn't hit another IED." He hesitated, then said, "Wren, when this is over, are you going to tell command what you found?" She went very still. He watched her sidelong. "I know you found something. I saw you in the comms room." Her hands tightened on the rifle. And I'm not asking to stick my nose in. Just, if there's a snake in the chain of command, it matters who you tell. And when." Her jaw flexed. He wasn't wrong. If she moved too early, whoever was behind the betrayal could bury the evidence, or bury her. "I'll handle it," she said. He nodded once. Trusted her enough not to press. Then he left her to the moonlit quiet. The convoy came just after 0200. A low growl of diesel engines drifted across the desert. Headlights winked in the distance, cutting spears of light through the darkness. Hale rose to her feet, signaling the watch teams. Weapons came up, tense and ready. The vehicles rolled closer, 6 MRAPs in formation, followed by supply trucks. The sight was almost surreal after 2 days of hell. As they rumbled through the outer gate, soldiers spilled out, fresh-faced, clean, their uniforms crisp. They looked around the battered outpost with widening eyes, taking in the craters, the blood-stained sand, the blackened wrecks of enemy vehicles. A tall officer in desert fatigue strode toward Hale, flanked by aides. His insignia gleamed, Lieutenant Colonel Royce. Hale slung her rifle across her back and descended the wall to meet him. She saluted sharply. "Sir." Royce returned it, his expression unreadable. "Commander Hale. I expected an outpost, not a graveyard." "Enemy force was larger than intelligence estimated," she said flatly. "We held." "So I see." His gaze swept the survivors, ragged, hollow-eyed, but standing. Something flickered in his eyes, quickly masked. "We'll relieve your men. Medics will take over triage. You'll be debriefed immediately." Her shoulders stiffened. "With respect, sir, my men are combat ineffective," he cut in. "They've done their part. Now it's time for the grown-ups to clean up the mess." The words landed like a slap. She kept her face stone still. Yes, sir. The debrief took place in a freshly erected field tent, its canvas walls glowing with lamplight. Royce sat at a folding table, gloves off, sipping from a metal mug. Hale stood across from him, back straight, helmet tucked under one arm. An aide tapped away on a laptop, logging every word. Royce listened silently as she walked him through the battle. Initial assault, defensive measures, second wave, destruction of the BMP, casualty count. She kept her voice clinical, detached. Facts, not feelings. He asked pointed questions about tactics, losses, enemy weaponry. Never once did he ask about the men, about their fear or their grit. Just numbers. Assets expended. When she finished, he leaned back, studying her like a specimen. You fought well, he said at last. But you stayed. When the first wave hit, evacuation was an option. You didn't take it. Evacuating would have left the corridor wide open, she replied. If they broke through here, they could have struck the logistics hub at Camp Faraday. Thousands of lives, millions in supplies. His lips twitched. And you made that call unilaterally. I made it because no one else was here to make it. Silence hummed. Then he nodded once, slowly. Understood. She almost relaxed until he said casually, one more thing. You didn't by chance see any unusual comms activity prior to the attack. Her pulse jumped. He was watching her too closely, eyes flat as glass. No, she said evenly. Just the usual weather traffic. Royce held her gaze for a long, heavy moment. Then he smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Very well. Get some rest, Commander. You've earned it. She didn't go to the med tents. Didn't join the men as they collapsed into cots and sleeping bags. Instead, she slipped away under the pretense of checking the perimeter. The night air was cold and sharp in her lungs. Royce knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. The way he'd asked, too casual, like someone testing the temperature of water before stepping in. And if he was part of it, then reporting to him would be suicide. He could bury her, frame her, erase her. She crouched behind the burnt shell of a truck, pulled the small drive from her vest, and plugged it into her secure handheld. The file she'd copied from the data core glimmered on screen. She encrypted it again, triple-locked it behind kill switches, and tucked it away. She would need to get this to someone she could trust. Someone outside this chain. Maybe Naval Special Warfare Command directly, bypassing intermediaries. But that meant surviving long enough to reach them. And right now, she wasn't sure survival was on the menu. A shadow moved at the edge of her vision. She spun, rifle snapping up. Finch froze mid-step, hands raised. Easy. It's just me. Jesus, she muttered, lowering the weapon. What are you doing out here? Same as you, he said. Couldn't sleep. He walked closer, eyes scanning her face. You look worse than I feel. And that's saying something. She huffed a quiet laugh despite herself. Go get some rest, Finch. He hesitated, then said, You know, when they told us a SEAL was coming to command this mission, we all pictured some mountain of muscle. Loud, arrogant, chewing nails. She arched an eyebrow. Disappointed? Terrified, he said simply. And a little grateful. That hit something deep. She looked away. Get some rest, she repeated softly. He nodded and limped off into the dark. She stayed crouched by the wreck until dawn bled into the sky. They moved out the next morning. The outpost was abandoned, its walls left to crumble under the desert wind. The reinforcements swept through like ants, collecting salvage, burning enemy corpses, erasing every trace that a battle had ever happened here. Hale's squad was folded into the convoy, packed into an MRAP with their gear piled around them. The hum of the engine was hypnotic after so many days of silence and gunfire. Some of the men dozed, heads lolling. Finch snored softly. Cole sat across from Hale, watching her with hooded eyes. You're thinking, he murmured. Always. Thinking gets people killed. Not thinking gets them killed faster. He smirked faintly, then closed his eyes. She tried to close hers. She couldn't. The walls of the vehicle felt too tight, the air too still. She kept picturing Royce's smile. Kept hearing that voice, stop digging. The convoy snaked through the desert for hours, eventually reaching the logistics hub at Camp Faraday, a sprawling fortress of concrete walls and razor wire, buzzing with helicopters and forklifts. Clean uniforms. Clean boots. The world looked sterile, unreal, after the dirt and blood of the outpost. They were herded off the trucks and directed to debrief tents, showers, medical checks. Hale watched her men vanish into the organized chaos, feeling strangely hollow. They deserved this reprieve. She didn't trust it. As she walked toward the command HQ, A young lieutenant intercepted her, saluting crisply. "Commander Hale? Colonel Royce requests your presence immediately." Of course he did. The HQ conference room was cold, air-conditioned, the walls lined with screens showing satellite feeds. Royce stood at the head of the table, speaking quietly with two unfamiliar men in suits. They had the look of spooks, smooth, pale, watchful. Intelligence, probably Defense Intelligence Agency or Central Intelligence Agency. When Royce noticed her, he dismissed them with a nod. They slipped out silently, eyes flicking over her as they passed. "Hale," Royce said, gesturing her in. "Sit." She stayed standing. "Sir." His mouth twitched, annoyed. "You've been reassigned." Her pulse stuttered. "Reassigned?" "A Tier 1 tasking," he said. "Black. Compartmentalized. You leave tonight." Her mind raced. "My men will remain here. They're out of the fight until cleared by medical." "This isn't a request, Commander. It's an order." She stood rigid. "Mission parameters? You'll be briefed in transit." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You should consider this an opportunity. Very few get tapped for this level. It means someone upstairs likes you. Or wants me where they can see me," she thought. He handed her a sealed envelope, red-stamped classified. "Get your gear. Wheels up in 2 hours." She found Cole outside the med tent, smoking a contraband cigarette. He straightened when he saw her face. "Bad news?" "Transfer," she said. "Black mission." His jaw tightened. "Convenient timing." "Yes." "You going to take it?" "Don't have a choice." He studied her. "Want me to watch your back here? Keep an eye on the others?" A lump rose in her throat. She forced it down. "Yeah. Do that." They stood in silence for a moment, desert wind fluttering the canvas around them. Then he said, "Don't die." She almost smiled. "I'll try to disappoint them." 2 hours later, she was airborne in the belly of a C-130 Hercules, gear bag at her feet, the red lights of the cargo bay pulsing like a heartbeat. She was alone except for two silent operators she didn't recognize, their insignia scrubbed, faces hidden behind helmets and masks. They didn't speak to her. Didn't even look at her. "Ghost." She opened the sealed envelope. Inside was a single sheet. Target, Deep Well. Location, classified. Objective, retrieve intel package. Exfil, silent. Authorization, Zulu 9. No coordinates. No details. Just a code name. She folded the sheet slowly, slipped it into her vest, and leaned back against the vibrating wall of the plane. The roar of the engines filled her head. She had no idea where she was going. No idea what waited there. Only the gnawing certainty that this reassignment wasn't a reward. It was a containment. Someone was trying to pull her off the board. She stared into the red-lit dark and thought, "You'll have to try harder than this." The plane banked sharply, engines howling, and the world dropped away beneath her. Under a moonless sky, the desert air shimmered with a bone-dry chill. The convoy of armored vehicles rumbled forward, their headlights off, moving like a shadowy beast across the cracked earth. Inside the lead MRAP, Commander Riley Kane sat with her rifle across her lap, eyes fixed on the digital map glowing faintly on her wrist screen. Every mile brought them closer to the heart of enemy territory, closer to the warlord's compound rumored to be housing stolen U.S. weapons, and possibly the hostage they had been sent to recover. The hum of the engine and the smell of gun oil pressed down like a weight. She felt the eyes of her team on her even though no one spoke. They trusted her now more than ever after the ambush and their survival. That trust was heavier than any armor. "86 minutes, murmured Gunnery Sergeant Morales from the passenger seat, voice low, steady but tight around the edges. Riley's jaw flexed. "Silent approach from here. Dismount at the ridge. No lights, no chatter unless absolutely necessary." Morales gave a nod. Behind them, 3 other MRAPs rolled silently onward, each crammed with battle-worn operators who had seen enough firefights to recognize when something didn't feel right. This didn't feel right. The radio silence from the compound had been too perfect. It felt like bait. As they slowed near the ridge, Riley raised her fist. The convoy braked in perfect sync. Dust plumed in the darkness as boots hit the dirt, and the seals melted into formation like wraiths. She scanned the silhouette of the compound below, a sprawl of low concrete buildings ringed by barbed wire and rusting vehicles. No movement. No sentries. No dogs. It was too quiet. Her earpiece hissed softly. "Thermals show nothing," whispered Petty Officer Grant from the rear. "No heat signatures." "That's not possible," Morales muttered. Riley exhaled slowly. Then they're underground, or waiting to kill us. Either way, we're not backing off. They moved down the slope like dark water, rifles ready. The dry wind cut across her face as they breached the perimeter, slipping through a gap in the wire. Morales placed a gloved hand on a steel door and mouthed, "Cold." Riley gave a quick hand signal. 2 breachers came forward, wired a strip of C6 and stepped back. The shaped charge blew with a muffled crack, and the door crumpled inward. They flooded the room, empty. Thus, broken chairs. No bodies. Not even rats. "Clear," called Chief Petty Officer Vega. His voice was uneasy. Riley's gut churned. They stripped it. This was never about holding position. This was a lure. As if answering her thought, a distant thump echoed from the hills behind them. Then another. The ground trembled. Mortars. Morales barked. "Incoming." "Get down." Riley shouted. The first shell landed just outside the compound wall. The explosion ripped through the night like thunder, hurling chunks of concrete. Shrapnel hissed through the air. The second shell smashed into the old vehicle yard, igniting fuel drums in a bloom of fire that bathed everything in orange light. The once empty compound was now a kill zone. Riley scrambled to her feet, ears ringing. "They're bracketing us, zeroing in." Vega yelled, dragging a dazed operator behind cover. Riley ducked behind a wall and keyed her mic, "All teams, fall back north, break contact." "Repeat, break contact." "Smoke and suppress." Thick plumes of smoke grenades blossomed as the team laid down covering fire, retreating toward the ridge. Mortars slammed closer, showering them in rock and dirt. A third round struck the wall beside Riley, knocking her off her feet. Pain exploded along her ribs as she hit the ground, breath gone. Morales's hands yanked her up, shouting something she couldn't hear over the ringing. They stumbled up the slope, bullets sparking off stones around them. Shadows moved on the ridge above. The enemy had flanked them. Tracer fire stitched the darkness. Riley dropped to one knee, firing controlled bursts. 2 shapes crumpled, tumbling down the rocks. But more kept coming. "Vega, cover the left," she roared. "Grant, pop flares now." Bright white flares shot skyward, bathing the battlefield in brutal daylight. Dozens of enemy fighters poured over the ridge, black scarves whipping in the wind. They were heavily armed, disciplined. This wasn't a ragtag militia. This was a trained force. Riley's mind flashed with the realization. This was a trap not just for her team, but for anyone the warlord wanted to annihilate in one stroke. Grant screamed as a round tore through his leg, dropping him. Vega hauled him over his shoulders, still firing one-handed. "We're pinned. We need air." "Negative," Morales grunted, slamming a new mag into his M4. "They'll be on us before CS gets here." Riley's heart pounded like a drum. Choices crashed through her mind like shrapnel. They could stay and be slaughtered or split and risk capture. Neither was acceptable. She ripped a thermobaric grenade from her vest, thumbed the pin. "Morales, smoke and retreat path east," she ordered, calm as steel. "Vega, get Grant moving. I'll buy us 30 seconds. "No way, Kane." Morales barked. "You're not staying behind." Not asking permission. She bolted from cover, sprinting toward the advancing enemy. Bullets cracked past. She hurled the grenade into their path and dove behind a concrete block. The blast hit like a sledgehammer. Fire rolled outward, sucking the oxygen from the air. The front wave of fighters vanished in a roar of pressure and dust. "Move. Go now," she shouted, staggering upright. The team surged east through the smoke. Riley limped after them, ribs screaming, vision swimming. They crested the ridge just as another mortar slammed into the compound, blowing what remained of the building sky high. The shockwave flung her down the far slope, tumbling in dirt and gravel until she landed hard on her back. The world spun. Strong hands grabbed her. "Morales again. You good?" She coughed blood, nodded. "Keep moving." They fled through the broken hills, pursued by sporadic gunfire. The chase stretched for brutal minutes, then fell silent. Finally, panting, scraped raw, they reached the extraction point, a dry riverbed where 2 camouflaged MH-60 helicopters crouched like dark birds, rotors already spinning. "Go, go, go." Morales waved. The SEALs scrambled aboard, shoving Grant inside as medics pounced on him. Riley climbed in last. The Black Hawks lifted into the sky, banking hard. Below, the enemy fighters gathered on the ridge, shaking their fists as the U.S. machines thundered away. Riley sat slumped in her seat, helmet in her lap, sweat and dust streaking her face. She watched the burning compound shrink into a spark on the horizon. Every muscle ached, Every nerve felt frayed. They had been seconds from annihilation, and it was only part one of the mission. Somewhere that hostage was still alive. Somewhere the warlord still had their stolen weapons. And now he knew exactly who had come for him. Morales leaned over. "You saved our asses," he said quietly. "Not all of them," she replied. Her voice cracked. Grant's screams carried over the headset as the medic worked to stop the bleeding. Riley closed her eyes. She could still feel the heat of the explosion on her skin. Hours later, back at Forward Operating Base Sentinel, Riley stood in the debriefing tent, stripped of her gear, a fresh wrap around her ribs. Admiral Hawthorne loomed behind the folding table, his eyes sharp and cold. A satellite image of the compound's wreckage glowed on the screen. "You walked into an ambush?" Hawthorne said flatly. "Intel said minimal resistance." "Intel was wrong," Riley replied. Her tone was like carved stone. "They were waiting. He knew we were coming." Hawthorne's jaw twitched. "You're telling me the leak is internal?" "I'm telling you someone fed him our timetable and force size," she said. "And if we don't find who, this warlord will stay 3 steps ahead." Silence crackled between them. Hawthorne finally nodded. "Refit. 48 hours. You go back in with a skeleton team. No radios. No chatter. Off the grid." Riley stiffened. "Sir, with respect, after tonight he'll be expecting that." "Exactly," Hawthorne said. "So surprise him." Dismissed. As she left the tent, the cool night wind cut through the base. The laughter of younger soldiers drifted from the mess hall. Somewhere in the showers she knew some of them still whispered about her. The woman who had been mocked as a ghost, a myth, not real. She didn't care. They hadn't been on that ridge tonight. They hadn't seen death grinning at them in the muzzle flashes. She walked past the med tent. Through the flap, she caught sight of Grant, pale but grinning weakly as Vega sat by his side, telling some crude joke. Riley allowed herself the smallest smile, then turned away. Morales caught up to her outside. "You're thinking too loud," he said. She huffed a faint laugh. "You know me too well. I know you're gonna get us killed if you go back in like this." She stopped, faced him. "I'm not going back in like this. I'm going back in smarter." Morales studied her, then nodded once. "Then I'm in." She watched him walk off, then looked up at the black sky. The stars burned like distant flares. Somewhere out there, the warlord was already preparing his next move. She could feel it in her bones. This was no longer just a rescue. It was a war of ghosts, and she intended to haunt him until he broke. The desert wind howled through the wire, carrying the scent of burnt fuel. Riley squared her shoulders and headed for the armory. The next fight would not be on his terms. The desert night wrapped itself around Commander Riley Kane like a cold shroud as she stepped into the armory. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering against racks of weapons and crates marked in black stencils. She moved with silent purpose, shedding her torn combat uniform for a fresh one, tightening the straps of her tactical vest until they bit into her ribs. Pain lanced through her side with every breath, but she ignored it. Pain meant she was still alive. And alive was all she needed to finish this. On the steel counter lay the gear she had requested. Suppressed M4 custom optics, a silenced sidearm, a compact breaching kit, and a set of night vision goggles so advanced they weren't supposed to exist on paper. No radios, no trackers, just her wits, and whoever she trusted enough to follow. "Going hunting?" a gravelly voice asked from behind her. She didn't turn. "Not hunting," she said, sliding a magazine into her rifle with a metallic click. "Ghosting." Gunnery Sergeant Morales leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, face carved from stone. He studied her for a long moment. "You know the brass will hang us out to dry if this goes sideways." "They'll hang us out to dry anyway," she replied. "I'm not letting that warlord keep our weapons, or our people. He thinks he buried us tonight. We'll show him he only woke us up." Morales smirked faintly. "Who else you bringing?" "Vega," she said. "And Petty Officer Singh. Small, quiet, fast. Anyone else is a liability." "Then we go dark," Morales said. "No comms. Dead zone." "Exactly." She glanced at him. "You in?" He grinned like a wolf. "Thought you'd never ask." 2 hours later, the 4 of them crouched around a satellite map on a dirt floor inside an abandoned maintenance shed at the far edge of Forward Operating Base Sentinel. The place smelled of oil and rust, a forgotten corner no one bothered to check. Singh, the youngest of them, flicked her knife against the map to mark their target, a walled compound hidden in a canyon far beyond regular patrol zones. "Drone flyover caught heat signatures here," Singh whispered, tapping a finger on a cluster of red dots. Mostly generators. But the canyon walls distort thermal returns. Could be 50 men inside, could be 5. They'll be expecting a full strike team, Vega said. His deep voice was calm but edged with tension. Hellos, armor, noise. We give them none of that. Riley nodded. We move on foot. Insertion from the plateau, rappel into the canyon, breach the west wall. We stay invisible. If they see us, we're already dead.